How is your heart? I believe the quality of our answers is always directly correlated to the quality of our questions. I grew up in a funeral home on the north side of Chicago, and while most kids were dropped off at school in a minivan, I showed up in the passenger side of a hearse. I tried to avoid eye contact with classmates only to be called out by my dad, who would proudly turn on our big purple lights and wish us all a good day as he drove off. He thought it helped build my character. When I was 16, I learned to drive in that hearse. He would take me to cemeteries on the weekend and say, "Okay, now go around in circles. You can't kill anyone here." He had a very practical sense of humor. But one thing my mom never thought was funny was the way he failed to prepare for birthdays and anniversaries. He just wasn't the kind of person to buy you a gift and wrap it. A couple of years ago, he finally got tired of hearing the usual complaints, and he said to my mom, "One of these days, I'm gonna surprise you." Well, my father died unexpectedly on Mother's Day. I told you, very practical sense of humor. Death has taught me a lot about life, and I believe grief, for as tragic as it always is, can also be an unexpected gift. Because it levels us, it brings clarity after chaos. It urges us to ask better questions, real questions. Death is the force that cradles us all into long-distance loves between this life and the hereafter. If you could call heaven right now, who would you want to answer the phone? Whose voice are you afraid to forget? For the first time in a very long time, the whole world is grieving. In a society hell-bent on perpetuating difference, grief is the blessing of sameness. It compels us to compassion. Death has this way of exposing truth, while simultaneously softening out edges and sharpening points of view with the kind of clarity that can only come from staring down a grave. Given everything we've been living through, like plague, long overdue global racial unrest, and national terrorism here at home, I stopped asking people the most common question, "How are you?" I started asking more direct questions. My favorite one so far is, "How is your heart?" For many years now, I have been sort of mesmerized by this language of the heart. It began with a Bible verse, a pretty common one from Proverbs. "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." And to be clear, where we stand on faith doesn't really matter a whole lot to me. The Bible is not just for believers. That would be pretentious. The Bible is complicated literature, bathed in historical wisdom. Wisdom belongs to everyone. After this season, we have survived. I'm convinced we saw our hearts, and everything we did flowed from it. The broken and the beautiful, the sinister and the saintly, we saw it all like a train wreck right through our living room. Hearts are complicated and compromised, ornately in contradiction often, but we heed them because we need them. They're the tug that keeps us human. The difficult to describe dichotomy between what we know and what we feel, what we must and what we ought, the list goes on. But we draw from what we know. We lead with what we love. I myself am a Catholic, a cool Catholic. And this language of the heart is laced into my tradition. It has given shape to the way I think. I studied theology at Duke. I was trained to parse scripture, cross-examine different forms of philosophy, and argue with fervor about things most people don't get to talk about every day, like virtue ethics and eschatology, or the science of last things, of the end. And alongside that, I think because I have spent so much of my life at wakes and graveside at funerals, I tend to be a little bit serious about time. I started to ask myself, did my questions merit meaning? How does remembering the end orient a whole life? I was studying what I adore but cannot prove, because faith is funny like that. And then I read John Henry Newman. You know how when you're in that awkward getting to know you phase, people always ask, If you could have dinner with anyone in the world, living or dead, who would it be? Well, I would say Jesus, Dolly Parton, Trevor Noah, and John Henry Newman, in that order. He was a convert who spent a lifetime writing about what people believe and how we come to believe it. In other words, how we arrive at assent. He gave the world vocabulary for articulating truth claims for themselves. Literally, he wrote the book, The Grammar of Assent. But despite all Newman wrote, and he wrote a lot, nothing hits as deeply as what he chose to be his motto, a phrase he took from St. Francis de Sales. Core ad core. Heart speaks to heart. Because they do, hearts talk. When the world opens back up again and we begin to encounter one another, even when we no longer wear a mask, let's not simply just trade that mask for all the ones we wore before, the invisible sort. Let's commit to asking better questions and actually meaning them. As we move forward, may we live in the knowledge that time is not a renewable resource. And I hope we will be very careful about being so quick to heal and move on that we make our loss and our mourning the opposite of elegant. I believe the quality of our answers is always directly correlated to the quality of our questions. So, I'm dying to know, how is your heart?